8 signs poor blood circulation is damaging your body. If your hands are always cold, if your feet tingle for no reason at night, or if a small cut on your leg has taken weeks to heal, your body may already be trying to tell you something your doctor has not caught yet. And here is the part most people get wrong. It has nothing to do with simply getting older. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you notice any of the signs we cover today, it may be helpful to speak with a qualified healthcare provider who can evaluate your specific situation. Here is a number worth sitting with for a moment. The circulatory system stretches for roughly 60,000 miles inside your body right now, quietly delivering oxygen and nutrients to every organ, every muscle, and every nerve ending you have. When that delivery system slows down, even slightly, it rarely announces itself with one dramatic symptom. Instead, it creeps in sideways, a little more tiredness than usual, a strange tingling that comes and goes, skin that looks slightly different in photographs than it did a few years ago. These small shifts get dismissed as normal aging almost every time, when in reality, they may be your body's earliest attempt to tell you that blood is not reaching certain areas the way it should. Over the next few minutes, we are going to walk through 8 signs that researchers and physicians associate with reduced blood flow, starting with the ones you may already half recognize in yourself, and moving toward signs that catch even the most attentive people completely off guard. Stay with us for the 7th one especially, because it involves a symptom that many people mistake for something else entirely, something with no obvious connection to circulation at all, until you understand what is actually happening beneath the surface. Circulation problems do not appear out of nowhere. A number of everyday factors can gradually influence how efficiently blood moves through the body, including long periods of sitting or standing without movement, smoking, carrying extra body weight, uncontrolled blood sugar levels, and simply the natural stiffening of blood vessels that can occur with age. None of these factors guarantee that someone will experience reduced circulation, and having one or two of them does not mean anything is currently wrong. But understanding what tends to contribute to this pattern can make the following 8 signs feel less like a random list of symptoms, and more like pieces of a single, connected story happening inside your own body. It also helps to understand, briefly, how the system is supposed to work when everything is functioning normally. Arteries carry oxygen-rich blood away from the heart, out toward the rest of the body, while veins carry that blood back toward the heart once the oxygen has been delivered to the tissues that need it. Any slowdown anywhere along that round trip, whether in the arteries, the veins, or the smaller vessels in between, can eventually produce noticeable effects somewhere in the body. Keeping that basic picture in mind will make each of the following signs easier to connect to one another as we go. Let's start at the place most of us actually notice it first. Number 1, cold hands and feet that do not warm up easily. There is a difference between hands that feel a little chilly after walking outside in December, and hands that stay cold no matter how many layers you put on, how close you sit to the heater, or how long you run them under warm water. When circulation is reduced, the smaller blood vessels in the fingers, toes, ears, and nose often receive less blood flow than the rest of the body, because the body naturally prioritizes blood delivery to vital organs first. This is sometimes described by doctors as peripheral circulation, meaning the circulation that reaches the outer parts of the body, farthest from the heart. Margaret, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher, described it to her doctor this way. She said her hands felt cold even in the middle of summer, and that her grandchildren had started calling her fingers, quote, ice cubes, unquote, as a joke during family dinners. She had assumed it was simply a normal part of getting older. What she did not realize is that persistent coldness in the extremities, especially when one side feels noticeably colder than the other, or when the color of the fingers changes to pale white or a bluish tone, may be associated with reduced blood flow reaching those areas. It does not automatically mean something serious is happening, but it is a pattern worth mentioning to a healthcare provider, particularly if it happens consistently rather than just on especially cold days. This sign often gets brushed aside because it seems so minor, but it sets the stage for understanding something important. Circulation problems tend to show up first in the parts of the body farthest from the heart, which is exactly why the next two signs on this list often appear in the hands and feet as well, just in a slightly different form. Number 2, numbness, tingling, or a pins and needles sensation. Almost everyone has experienced the strange tingling feeling of a foot that has, quote, fallen asleep, unquote, after sitting in an awkward position for too long. That sensation happens because pressure has temporarily restricted blood flow and nerves signaling to that area. Now imagine that same sensation showing up randomly, without an obvious cause, sometimes in the fingers, sometimes in the feet, sometimes lasting just a few seconds, and sometimes lingering for several minutes. When blood flow to the nerves is consistently reduced, the nerves themselves may not receive enough oxygen to function normally, and this can create sensations of tingling, numbness, or a mild burning feeling, particularly in the hands and feet. Doctors sometimes refer to this general category as a form of peripheral neuropathy, which simply means nerve dysfunction occurring in the outer parts of the body, away from the brain and spinal cord. There are many possible causes of this sensation, and reduced circulation is only one of them, which is exactly why a proper evaluation from a healthcare provider matters rather than guessing at the cause on your own. Harold, a 68-year-old retired truck driver, mentioned to his physician that his feet had started feeling, in his words, quote, asleep all the time, unquote, even first thing in the morning before he had even gotten out of bed. He had assumed it was simply related to years of sitting behind the wheel. His doctor explained that while several factors can contribute to this kind of sensation, persistent numbness that shows up without an obvious physical cause, especially when paired with cold extremities like we just discussed, may be worth investigating further as a potential circulation-related pattern. It is worth noting that this sensation can sometimes be intermittent rather than constant, appearing for a few minutes at a time before fading away entirely, only to return later that same day. This on and off quality is part of what makes the sign so easy to dismiss. A single episode rarely alarms anyone. It is the accumulation of episodes over weeks or months, especially when they begin interfering with sleep or daily comfort, that tends to prompt people to finally mention it during a medical appointment. Once numbness and coldness start appearing together, the body may begin showing a third sign, one that becomes visible rather than just something you feel. Number 3, swelling in the legs, ankles, or feet. Swelling, medically referred to as edema, occurs when fluid builds up in the tissues of the body, and it often shows up first in the lower legs, ankles, and feet, simply because gravity pulls fluid downward throughout the day. When circulation slows down, blood can have difficulty returning efficiently from the legs back up toward the heart, and this can allow fluid to accumulate in the surrounding tissue. A simple way people sometimes notice this at home is by pressing a finger gently into the skin of the ankle or shin and watching whether an indentation remains for a few seconds afterward. If it does, that may be a sign of fluid retention worth discussing with a doctor. Swelling that appears mostly at the end of the day and improves overnight is common and not automatically alarming, but swelling that is persistent, that occurs in only one leg, or that comes with pain, warmth, or redness, should be evaluated promptly, since these particular patterns can sometimes be associated with more urgent circulatory concerns. Dorothy, a 74-year-old grandmother from a small town in Ohio, noticed that her favorite pair of shoes had started feeling tight by early afternoon, something that had never happened before. She initially blamed it on the summer heat. It turned out that her ankles were retaining more fluid than usual, a pattern her doctor linked to changes in how efficiently blood was circulating back up through her legs. Her situation is a helpful reminder that everyday clues, like shoes suddenly fitting differently, can sometimes point toward something happening internally that deserves a closer look. Swelling changes how the legs feel, but poor circulation can also change how the skin actually looks, which brings us to a sign that is often visible before it is ever felt. Number 4. Changes in skin color or texture. Skin relies heavily on a steady supply of oxygen-rich blood to maintain its natural color, warmth, and healing ability. When circulation is reduced, the skin on the legs, feet, or hands may begin to look pale, bluish, or unusually shiny. Some people also notice that leg hair seems to grow more slowly than it used to, or that the skin on the lower legs feels thinner or more fragile than in other areas of the body. Varicose veins, which are the twisted, enlarged, bluish-purple veins that sometimes appear on the legs, are another visual sign that can be connected to circulation difficulties, specifically related to how efficiently veins are moving blood back toward the heart against the pull of gravity. While varicose veins are extremely common and often harmless from a medical standpoint, in some cases they can be associated with more significant underlying circulation issues, so noticing new or worsening varicose veins is generally worth mentioning at a regular checkup. Think about how differently a healthy, thriving houseplant looks compared to one that has not received enough water in weeks. The color fades, the texture changes, and something about it simply looks different, even before it wilts completely. Skin behaves in a strikingly similar way when it is not receiving adequate blood flow. And once that reduced flow lingers for a while, the skin's ability to repair itself can be affected too, which leads directly into our next sign. Some people also notice that their nails become brittle, thicker than usual, or slower growing on the toes compared to the fingers. This happens for a similar reason, since nail growth depends on a steady supply of nutrients delivered through the bloodstream, and any reduction in that supply can show up in small, easily overlooked ways like these before anything more obvious appears. Number 5. Wounds or sores that heal slowly. Under normal circumstances, a minor cut or scrape on the leg heals within a week or two. Blood carries oxygen, immune cells, and nutrients directly to the site of an injury, and this steady supply is what allows new tissue to form and the wound to close properly. When circulation is reduced, that healing process can slow down significantly, sometimes leaving a small wound open for several weeks or even months. This is one of the more serious signs on this list, because a wound that will not close creates an ongoing opportunity for infection, and it may be an indication that blood flow to that particular area of the body is significantly reduced. Slow-healing sores are especially common on the lower legs and feet, and they deserve prompt attention from a healthcare professional rather than simply being covered up and monitored at home. Robert, a 65-year-old retired factory supervisor, mentioned to his doctor that a small scrape on his shin from bumping into his coffee table had still not healed after nearly 6 weeks. He had cleaned it regularly and kept it bandaged, assuming it simply needed more time. His doctor explained that a wound taking this long to heal, particularly in the lower leg, can sometimes point toward reduced circulation in that specific area, and that catching this pattern early generally allows for far more effective management than waiting until the wound becomes larger or infected. Reduced healing capacity in the skin is a visible clue that circulation is struggling locally in one specific area. But circulation problems do not always stay local. Sometimes they affect how the entire body feels during everyday activity, which brings us to a sign that many people mistake for simply being out of shape. Number 6. Fatigue, weakness, or cramping during light activity. Muscles depend on a steady, efficient supply of oxygenated blood in order to function properly, especially during physical activity like walking, climbing stairs, or carrying groceries. When circulation to the legs specifically is reduced, some people experience a cramping or aching sensation in the calf muscles during walking, which then eases with rest. This particular pattern has a medical name, intermittent claudication, and it is one of the more specific signs associated with reduced blood flow in the legs. Beyond cramping, general fatigue and unusual weakness during activities that used to feel easy can also be worth paying attention to. If someone finds that a walk they have done comfortably for years now leaves them winded or achy partway through, and this is a new and consistent pattern rather than an occasional off day, it may be worth discussing with a doctor, since muscles that are not receiving adequate blood flow tend to fatigue much faster than muscles with a normal, healthy blood supply. Eleanor, a 69-year-old woman who had walked the same 2 loops around her neighborhood park almost every morning for over a decade, noticed that she had started needing to stop and rest partway through the second loop, something she had never needed to do before. She initially chalked it up to simply getting older. Her doctor later explained that consistent cramping or fatigue appearing at a predictable point during walking, especially when it improves with rest, is a pattern that circulation specialists specifically look for when evaluating blood flow to the legs. What makes this particular sign so useful from a medical standpoint is its predictability. Unlike general tiredness, which can fluctuate for countless reasons on any given day, cramping tied to a specific distance or a specific number of stairs tends to repeat itself fairly consistently, almost like a pattern the body has settled into. That consistency is often what helps a doctor distinguish ordinary muscle fatigue from a cramping pattern connected to blood flow. Fatigue during physical activity is relatively easy to notice because it interrupts something you are actively trying to do. But there is another kind of fatigue that circulation problems can cause, one that is far easier to overlook because it does not involve the muscles at all. It involves the brain. Number 7. Difficulty concentrating, memory lapses, or mental fogginess. Here is the sign most people never expect, and the one we mentioned earlier as worth waiting for. The brain requires an enormous, constant supply of oxygen-rich blood in order to function properly, and even small reductions in blood flow to the brain can create symptoms that look nothing like a circulation problem on the surface. Instead, they can show up as difficulty concentrating, a general sense of mental fog, occasional confusion, or small memory lapses, like forgetting why you walked into a room or misplacing common words during conversation. Because these symptoms overlap so heavily with normal aging, ordinary stress, and simple lack of sleep, they are very easy to dismiss or misattribute. Many people, and honestly many doctors too, will not immediately connect a bit of forgetfulness with circulation, because the brain feels like such a separate system from the legs, feet, and hands we have been discussing throughout this video. But the same underlying principle applies everywhere in the body. Wherever blood flow is reduced, that particular tissue does not receive the oxygen and nutrients it needs to function at its best, and the brain is no exception to that rule. Frank, a 72-year-old retired accountant known throughout his family for his sharp memory and love of crossword puzzles, mentioned to his daughter that he had started losing his train of thought mid-sentence more often than usual, and that he occasionally blanked on the names of close family friends he had known for decades. He assumed it was simply a normal part of getting older. After a thorough evaluation, his doctor explained that mild, gradual reductions in blood flow to the brain can sometimes contribute to exactly this kind of subtle cognitive change, and that identifying and addressing the underlying circulation issue early may help support better brain function moving forward. This does not mean every instance of forgetfulness points to a circulation problem, but persistent, worsening, or unusual patterns are generally worth raising with a healthcare provider, rather than assuming they are simply an inevitable part of aging. This particular sign matters because it demonstrates just how far-reaching circulation problems can actually be. They do not stay confined to the legs or the hands. They can quietly touch nearly every system in the body, including the one responsible for how clearly we think. And that brings us to our 8th and final sign, arguably the most serious one on this entire list. Number 8, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, or an irregular heartbeat. The heart is, quite literally, the engine of the entire circulatory system, and when circulation throughout the body is compromised, the heart often has to work considerably harder to compensate. This added strain can sometimes produce noticeable symptoms, including chest discomfort or tightness, shortness of breath during activities that previously felt easy, unusual fatigue, or an irregular or noticeably rapid heartbeat. It is important to state clearly that chest discomfort and shortness of breath can indicate a genuine medical emergency, and these symptoms should never be ignored or self-diagnosed at home. If you or someone near you experiences sudden chest pain, pressure, tightness, or severe difficulty breathing, please call your local emergency number immediately, which in the United States is 911, or seek emergency medical care right away rather than waiting to see if the symptoms pass on their own. That said, milder and more gradual versions of these symptoms, meaning noticing that you become unusually breathless walking up a single flight of stairs, or feeling your heart race during activities that never used to cause that reaction, are patterns that absolutely deserve a conversation with a doctor, even if they do not feel like an emergency in the moment. These gradual changes may be associated with underlying circulatory or cardiovascular concerns, and catching them early generally allows for a much wider range of supportive options than waiting until symptoms become severe or sudden. Walter, a 77-year-old retired postal worker, had always taken pride in walking his daily route around the block without ever feeling winded. Over the course of several months, he began noticing that he needed to pause partway through, catching his breath in a way that felt unfamiliar and slightly unsettling. He mentioned it to his daughter almost in passing, describing it as, quote, probably just getting older, unquote. She encouraged him to bring it up at his next checkup instead of assuming, and that simple conversation with his doctor became the starting point for a more thorough evaluation of his cardiovascular health. It helps to remember that the heart itself is also a muscle, and like any muscle, it depends on its own dedicated blood supply, delivered through a network of vessels called the coronary arteries, in order to keep beating efficiently hour after hour, day after day, for an entire lifetime. When circulation anywhere in that network becomes compromised, the heart can be affected directly, which is part of why cardiovascular symptoms are treated with such urgency compared to some of the other signs on this list. The heart does not have the luxury of taking a break to recover the way a tired leg muscle does. So, to bring everything together, we have walked through 8 signs that researchers and physicians associate with reduced blood circulation, moving from the ones you can feel in your fingers and toes, through changes visible on the skin, all the way to symptoms involving the brain and the heart itself. Cold hands and feet that will not warm up, numbness and tingling with no clear cause, swelling in the legs and ankles, changes in skin color or texture, wounds that take far too long to heal, cramping or fatigue during ordinary activity, unexpected fogginess or memory lapses. And finally, chest discomfort, breathlessness, or an irregular heartbeat. Here is the number worth remembering from everything we covered today. The circulatory system stretches for roughly 60,000 miles throughout the human body, which means there is an enormous amount of territory for small, easily overlooked problems to quietly take root long before they become impossible to ignore. None of these 8 signs on their own means something is definitely wrong, and none of them should be treated as a diagnosis. But noticing a pattern, especially when 2 or 3 of these signs show up together, is exactly the kind of information worth bringing to a healthcare professional who can properly evaluate what is actually happening in your particular body. So here is a genuine question worth sitting with for a moment. Which of these 8 signs surprised you the most, and have you noticed any of them in yourself or in someone you care about? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because these conversations often help other viewers recognize something in their own lives too. If this video helped you understand your body a little better today, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from it, and subscribe if you would like to keep learning how to take better care of yourself, one clear, honest explanation at a time.